Well, good afternoon, everybody. I've never had the privilege of speaking at Speaker's Corner. But now I can say I've spoken at Speaker's Corner. I'm going to be reading from a prepared text. It is very un-me, but I do think that this is an election where the words after the fact...
Louder.
Louder? Okay.
Thanks.
That the words after the fact are actually more important than the numbers that came out on Saturday. So I think it's important to get the words right. So forgive me if I'm very boring when I put down this. This has been the most written about, most videoed, most tweeted, most followed, most shared, most discussed election in Singapore history. Right? So I'm not going to review the scores or the highlights and lowlights. I think that will put you to sleep, and I don't have the license to slap you away. Instead, I would like to offer some perspectives on what these polls mean for democratization in Singapore. Yesterday's shock announcement that Lee Kuan Yew and Goh Chok Tong would retire from government confirms what has always been true about Singapore elections since independence, that the mathematical results are less important than how the numbers are interpreted. Because I can't turn down, I can't look at them. Good. I'm happy to be with that.
We'd rather see.
Lights are hot. Lights are hot.
So even though last weekend's vote amounted to an extension of the world's longest running winning streak among countries to multi-party elections, even though Singapore remains a system with one dominant party, the government has interpreted the results as requiring it to undergo a significant makeover. Lee Kuan Yew and Goh Chok Tong scored their share of own goals during the campaign, but in apportioning blame for unpopular government policies, it's certainly not the case that they had to bear more responsibility than their cabinet colleagues. But again, it's the symbols, the narrative, that counts more than the facts. Lee Kuan Yew has chosen to sacrifice himself to give the strongest possible signal that this is a government able to mount a revolution from within, or a national cause that is greater than the future of the PAP's high priest. Similarly, the future of Singapore's unfinished democratic project is not to be gleaned from last week's score or from even any survey itself. It's more of an exercise of reading TVs. So today I'd like to argue that a few steps have been taken towards greater democratization, though probably not as much as the hype suggests. I'll argue that although the political culture has evolved to be less amenable to top-down government, Singapore remains inhospitable to progressive causes and has yet to develop spaces for mature debate. The struggle for Singapore's soul, to borrow Churchill's expression, is just beginning. And I'll argue that it's not just the politicians, but also leaders of civil society and public intellectuals who have a role to play in producing a good outcome. The GE has reshaped the political terrain in a couple of indisputable ways. First, Lee Hsien Loong's promise to keep the system contestable cannot be reversed. It is clear that the election is less willing to accept an unfair playing field. To the extent that the public sees unfairness, it will apply a kind of electoral affirmative action. It will give the opposition a discount and judge the PAP more harshly. But thus people crucify PAP candidates for saying silly things, but politely pretended not to notice opposition candidates at the same. Tactical missteps by the PAP were dissected in detail, while the mismanagement of the Reform Party, for example, went unparried, even by the ordinarily probing and perceptive online citizen. I'm convinced that the public will judge the PAP fairly only when the PAP plays fair with the opposition. Oh, and also when the PAP reviews ministerial salary. Furthermore, this GE is forcing the PAP to outgrow its dependence on a non-level PAP.
Can't hear.
This GE is forcing the PAP to outgrow its dependence on a non-level playing field. This hasn't happened yet, but it's moving in that direction. Interestingly, this is not mainly the work of the Singapore Democratic Party, which has campaigned fiercely against injustice in the political system. Sorry. Is that right? Oh, thank you. So this, the PAP being forced to outgrow its dependence on a non-level playing field is interestingly not mainly the work of the Singapore Democratic Party, which has campaigned fiercely against injustice in the political system. Instead, it's due to Rohde Campus Workers' Party, which has chosen a strategy of scaling the walls instead of bringing them down. That's the democratic significance of the Workers' Party in the 3 of June. It taught the PAP that it can't hide behind credentials and reputation because the opposition can find credentialed candidates and build an attractive brand, nor can the PAP so readily use safety in numbers in GRCs as a way to vote on seats, as the WP has shown that GRCs are a way for the opposition to win big. Henceforth, the PAP will have to focus more squarely on issues that matter to the election, and that's good for Singapore democracy. Second, it's clear that Singapore's political culture has decades of depoliticization in which normal politics has been replaced by technocratic administration seems to have given way to an openly contentious culture. The largely unrestricted internet has played a major role here. 15 to 20 years ago, and some of you are old enough to remember that, PAP leaders demanded deferential treatment in the name of Asian values. Today, Confucian norms are no match for a citizenry accustomed to freewheeling blogs and online forums. The GE made it clear that Singaporeans no longer tolerate being talked down to. Beyond that, I would be cautious about claiming that Singaporeans are suddenly great supporters of democratic competition, and I'm even less persuaded by claims that it was an internet revolution. I don't think we can explain the GE outcome without reference to good old-fashioned economic factors. Although Singapore has been enjoying double-digit growth, the structural problem is that growth has changed in its pattern. As one of the most open and exposed economies on earth, it has had 3 externally triggered recessions in the past decade, with heady growth spurts in between. Such volatility has played havoc with the government's much vaunted planning capabilities. Policies concerning public transport, public housing, and immigration have all been buffeted by violent swings in the economy, and all were major election issues. So before we conclude that Singaporeans are suddenly pro-democracy, it would be prudent to entertain the possibility that they are still mainly in favor of good governance. One clear is that they want the PAP to govern better. By returning the PAP to power on Saturday, Singaporeans accepted the reality that the PAP remains the natural party of government. The need for the PAP to change was not in dispute. The debate was instead over whether the PAP's own internalized values of service were enough to drive that change, or whether the PAP needed a stronger opposition to force the pace and direction of change. The electorate rejected, possibly permanently, the PAP's model of self-motivated self-improvement. For decades, Singaporeans have bought the line that accountability and transparency could be pursued on the PAP's own terms, with no need for strong external checks and balances. But this position, upping the global trend, was made plausible by the PAP's record of corruption-free government and well-distributed economic growth. This is no longer accepted, due partly to economic volatility and the widespread view that the only group that thinks that the PAP does not suffer from groupthink is the PAP.